field with you folks who are doing what I'm doing and what I have been doing. We are a small team up in Guelph. Been going for 12 years. This would be our third pivot. We've seen a lot of things, haven't seen anything quite like what we're all going through right now. But it's really an interesting time, and a time to really figure out what are the most effective things that we can be doing. And that's what I want to really talk about today. Bridget, I am thinking I'd love to get to know a little bit more about the crowd while we tee up here. So I'm thinking, why don't we do some of our poll questions to get started, just so that when I'm addressing my remarks, I'll be addressing them to the situations that we have here. So if everybody could take a moment and let us know, what is your business type? You got a little service, a little product, more of one, more of the other, let us know. Oh, and the panelists can't vote anyway. Or both, in case you're wondering. We've got a little bit of both here, pollinate our technology for mentor matching, and then a few other things we're doing. So let's see who we've got here on the call, Bridget.
Okay, we're at about 73%, so I'll then poll and share the results. So here are the results.
Okay, all right, great guys. This is super helpful for me. Thank you, thank you.
And since people dialing may not be able to see, so just to let folks in the room know, so business type product at 9%, service at 45%, and both at 45%. So I'll stop sharing now.
Excellent. Thank you, thank you. No, that's perfect. That's great. And I did have a couple other quick questions if people can humor me. I wanted to know, first of all the different areas you feel like your endeavor has been impacted, and kind of how much. So Bridget, let's just take an extra minute and go through those right at the outset here before we jump in, so we can make sure to cover off the things people are most interested in.
Okay, so poll 2, current status. So this is the current status. So what is your current situation? Check all that apply. So whether you just started up, virtual is new to you, you've had layoffs, you've lost clients, business, you need to pivot, we are pivoting. Okay, so far only one person has answered, so I'll wait till we're at about 7.
Yeah, for sure. So while you folks are answering that, I'm actually going to keep talking and take a moment to answer. I want to make the point today that we as entrepreneurs really are the front lines, along with our healthcare folks who obviously we're doing. I know lots of people, and I was talking to Bridget and Jennifer ahead of time, lots of clients, lots of you folks who are tied to Innovation Factory are pivoting toward whatever you can do to help with the COVID crisis, and helping different organizations to be able to step into that by switching around some of the capabilities that you may have. I know we're all doing that. The other thing that we need to do as entrepreneurs is really figure out how we are going to be able to really continue to input our talents into the economy, because they are very, very needed. Okay, great. This is awesome.
Yeah, so just to read out the poll results. So I got to about 60%. So 22% say they just started up. 33% say they are virtual. 33% says virtual is new. No one answered they've had layoffs. 11% said they've lost clients in business. 11% said you need to pivot, and 33% say that they're in the process of pivoting.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Bridget. That's super. I think we'll leave it there. I was going to ask also how much COVID has impacted people, but let's save that question for a little bit down the road.
Okay.
So this gives us a really good picture of who we've got here on the phone. And if I had my druthers, especially nowadays when I don't get as much access to people as I like to have, I'd love to be sitting around a table talking to you folks about this and hear much more about your stories. And one of the things I'm finding remarkable about this time is the conversations that are able to be had, even though I will fully say to you, as you may also be experiencing in your various businesses, that having meaningful sales conversations is a little challenging right now, particularly for new things. But the many stories that we are hearing of people's different experiences throughout the COVID crisis and in this COVID economy, if you will, The pandemic economy, now, you know, hopefully we're moving into the post-pandemic economy, but there are a million really interesting stories that coming out of everywhere of people's experiences. So I really want to collect up more of those stories from folks like yourself. I'm going to try to forecast some of my own story and the stories that I see into my remarks today. But I think really sharing in groups, I know that again, Jennifer and Bridget mentioned you folks are having roundtables and so on, but the opportunity to really get the stories out and moving can be really inspirational and instructive for us. So I'm glad to talk to you, but I miss you talking back more directly, I'll be honest. So our situation, we're in a situation where the workforce that we are accountable for as entrepreneurs, and as you saw on my last slide, we are by a major margin, small businesses are employing Canadians. This is sort of how our economy works. And through all of this, I actually did a presentation very similar to this it would be almost a month ago now with Innovation Guelph, and I was smiling to myself at how much change I made to the presentation, which is not a lot in terms of words, but my own experience with some of these things have grown. And, you know, a month ago, we were especially really having this moment of collective awakening to these new words and the new feelings around these words. And I think we're still in this now of sort of the collective trauma or the collective moment where we are all feeling something from this. And again, the diversity of responses is something very, very interesting. And I think very interesting for us entrepreneurs, both as people trying to sell something into this new market that's emerging, and also as employers, to know that people are, some are flourishing, some were made for a time like this, some are really struggling, some who are always motivated can't get motivated. Motivation is a huge topic that we're talking about right now. But cutting through it all, what we've seen is that people need to work when and where they can. Meaning for our mental health, having some kind of structure, having some kind of ability to go to work can be very helpful, although there's lots of memes about people lounging about here and there. By and large, people want to work, need to work. We're moving into a time, and again, being on the smaller side of businesses, and I saw on our poll that lots of you had already had some experience going virtual. There is, you know, the specter of how do we get back together? Lots of companies are not going to have people come back to the office in the way that they did before. So also facilitating and making sure that things are as productive as they need to be when we no longer quite work the same way is part of what's coming forth for us, and something we're thinking about at Pollinate in terms of our effectiveness practices. The other part of the situation analysis is on our businesses in general. So we've also gone through collective trauma. An average number I hear banding about is people are losing, you know, about 30% of their sales to get started so far. You know, some are going up, some are going down, some are on a full interruption that could go on long enough to become a real problem, not to restate the obvious. But there's lots of things going on here, and the attention space is even louder, meaning trying to get attention, trying to put something out there to your customers or your prospective customers is also a real challenge. But we as entrepreneurs, this is sort of what we've been built for. As much as this is really painful, it's really different, the humanitarian aspects of the crisis that we're in, the health aspects, the far-going, long-standing nature of the problem that we're in is really remarkable. But as entrepreneurs, we are used to living, floating like corks on the ocean and moving up and down the waves, being agile, turning to meet things, and really working a lot in these spaces. So these are the things I would love to call to action in all of us. How can we bring those entrepreneurial capabilities that we've built by doing the deed, by actually living this way? And I got to tell you, my business, 3 pivots up and down, Definitely would say COVID is stretching us from a financial perspective in all different ways. I'd also say I've created some crises for myself in that vein before, in the past. So can we bring our experiences collectively into our individual businesses to help us position ourselves into the pandemic and post-pandemic economies as they emerge? And we don't know exactly what things are going to look like. I'll talk a little bit about that as we get down the presentation. What do we do when it's actually really not clear what's going to happen? Us organizational effectiveness, organizational development folks have been thinking about that for a while. So I have this checklist I wanted to share with you. And this is something that my team of wonderful and some talented, extremely talented folks are going to help me flip into an ebook. So any comments you have, any stories you want to check in, I would happily receive and credit you for. But I wanted to distill down, if I had to find a little back pocket resource, a little job aid, a touchstone for myself in this time, what are the things that I would focus on? I came up with the things that we really focus on in org effectiveness, organizational development, in looking at ourselves as solution providers when we're in crisis. What do we do when we're in crisis? What do we do when we're going virtual? And what are the things we know to be true? Now that virtual teams have been a thing for a while, and they're now becoming a much greater part of everyone's lives in some way. And then how do you know? What are our lead indicators of effectiveness? And I will say one of the best lessons that I've ever had in effectiveness, or that I continue to have in effectiveness, comes from being a parent. And sometimes in parenting, we have to ask ourselves, I may be right, but is this the most effective way to go? So it may be right that I want something done a certain way, or I need to get a point across, but am I doing it the most effective way? So I'm always asking myself that question at work as well. And a lot of the effectiveness checklist has come out of what gets in the way when we're not doing our most effective work? What happens when we slip and things aren't quite what we wanted them to be? So I'm going to take you through them. I'm going to try to storytell through them as I go. Please do jump in with questions, comments. As Bridget was saying, there's lots of help here on the phone. Or on the phone, that shows my age, on the Zoom for any anything you want to interject with. Alrighty, so tone. One thing I would say about tone is karma. I bring up tone as an effectiveness strategy because I think that for those of us as entrepreneurs, and believe me, this is true in larger companies too, very true in larger companies. But can we pay attention to the tone that we are running things in, to the tone of our voices, to the tone that we're giving to things? What you will find if you study how people receive messages and the resulting actions from receiving those messages is that having a tone of anxiety, a tone of annoyance, a tone of that people aren't quite clear. Is it a happy tone or a sad tone? Leads to all kinds of static or interference for us. And we know that if you have experience running your own business or running your own team in a company, you're going to know that when your tone is not positive or not, and it doesn't need to be unnecessarily positive. You don't have to be positive all the time, but when your tone becomes stressed or stretched, or you don't have a tone that feels balanced and authentic, like the real you to people, you'll probably get that tone back fairly shortly. You're going to wonder where it's come from, but you will, if you start to notice, you'll notice that when you intervene in something with a tone that is not maybe not suited to the situation, or maybe you're not feeling your best self and you're giving some input at a time when your tone is not being monitored or you're not really aware of it, you'll notice you get it back. Now, it seems like a superhuman thing to ask you to really monitor your tone. We're in a crisis after all, for heaven's sakes. We're in a pandemic. There are times when things are going to creep in, but tone is a real indicator of what's underneath. So I invite you and advocate for you to pay attention to your tone, because if your tone is starting to creep up, you're starting to feel less, it's less easy to interface with you because your tone is tense, or your tone is overbearing, your tone feels off a bit. There's probably something underneath that you need to deal with. There's some way that you need to rebalance yourself. And at this time, it is not only a tall order to stay balanced, it is a monumentally tall order, especially for those of us who are very aware that, you know, we are living pretty close to the ground. We are making our money by our wits and possibly, you know, providing employment to others as we go. Very hard to keep a balanced, healthy tone during that time, but super important, and super important for you to pay attention to the fact that if this is feeling hard, if it's feeling hard to keep your tone steady, maybe time to figure out why, to get a little bit deeper and figure out what kind of self-care you need to be doing. And believe me, when I started my business, I didn't think words like self-care were going to be coming out of my mouth. You know, being an analyst by trade, but I will confirm through my own experience as well as the research that your ability to really take care of yourself and keep that feeling of groundedness and centeredness is going to come across in your tone. Super important for employees, super important for customers, super important for you as you develop your own narrative. And again, I'm not saying shove down the bad emotions. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying figure out how you're going to process them and make sure they're not getting on other people. Hard to do right now, but definitely worth it. Trust. Ooh, trust is the next one. And everybody says trust. Of course, you can only move at the speed of trust and all that kind of stuff. Trust is obvious. And when I'm talking about trust, I'm also talking about the idea of having an accountability system, essentially. So whatever that might look like right now. So it might mean that you need to wade a little further into people's worlds to make sure things are going as they should, because they're dealing with a lot of stuff in their world. It may mean things can go as per normal. We just have to do it virtually. But what we're looking for is to make sure for you, the entrepreneur, that you know if there are weak chains and where they may break. If you should be able to work with your team to come up with a system to say, we know these are the most important things to get done, and then work toward doing them. In this crisis situation, it may become very, very granular. So if you have a team, you're still working away with your team, finding ways that, number one, your meetings and conversations build trust. How do things build trust? Well, you close loops. That's a big part of it. A big part of it is we decided to do these things. We should be able to check in on ourselves and make sure they're happening. So my team, we use a couple of things. We have some just very basic spreadsheety stuff where if we've decided we're going to do something, we put it on there and kind of make sure that milestones are getting hit. We also use a Trello system. So the whole idea of a Kanban, some way that we can see the things that we decided to do, we are actually doing them. So, and this is for us too. As entrepreneurs, the days are sliding by. It's a strange time. Are you actually focused? And when you say you're going to do something, finding the time to do it, finding the time to follow up and keep people up to date. That modeling that you're doing right now of your trust system, which literally might be putting things on a list and following it up, maybe much more elaborate, but the ability to really trust that what we've agreed to do is going to get done in a crisis is key. This will keep us out of further crisis. One thing we always used to teach in change management, and I think it's a little bit out the window now, is try to stay out of crisis. If you want a change to go well, try not to spike the crises in the middle of it. And one way to stay out of crisis is to get these simple trust systems in place where, whether it's a to-do list or some very simple way to know what we said is going to get done, super important right now. Timing. This is where we as entrepreneurs need to think about ourselves as a vessel. And I'm asking a lot of you here today. If we want to be truly effective, though, we are thinking about our tone. We are building trust systems, of which we are a part and need to be a modeling representative part. We also need to really confront the idea of figuring out when is the right time for things. Let's say for right now, the cat is our spirit animal, and we have to know when to pounce. We have to know when is the right time. People have less cognitive energy. So to my first points, you know, we are the main employer in the country, and our workforce is taking a psychic beating right now, even if they are not physically ill from the pandemic. They are besieged with very, very worrying signals in pretty much every area of their life. Smattered with joy, no doubt, smattered with joy. But here we have a capacity issue. We're going to talk about capacity a little bit later on, but automatically take 30% of people's capacity off the table for us right now because of the crisis. Just thinking about that, thinking about their parents. Maybe they haven't lost 30% of their capacity, which is good for you if they haven't. But let's assume most human beings are going to be very full up thinking about this problem that we all collectively have. As entrepreneurs, we've got to keep things moving. We've got to figure out how to move around the rocks. And sometimes that means we've got to really hyper prioritize. And the way I'm hyper prioritizing with my team right now is things that don't require special timing, that are always urgent and should be dealt with immediately, are client stuff. And when people are feeling their emotions starting to get in the way of being able to work. Everything else kind of needs to be thought about either by you, your management team, as the leaders, as to when is the right time to talk about this. Different people have really different responses to learning and knowledge transfer to start with. And that's the business we're in at Pollinate, is, you know, cross-pollinating information. So we think about this a lot, and different people already take in different information differently. During a crisis, remember our amygdala. I don't know if everybody knows about their amygdala, but it's a little part of your brain that goes, oh my God, we better do something. Amygdalas are firing. Makes it hard to sometimes assimilate new information, or we might just get a piece of it, or we might think that one thing is meant when another is meant because we're not paying a lot of attention. So part of the timing during crisis is to make sure we're not overwhelming people, literally full up. People are really, really at capacity with crisis or with what they're already doing. So let's not get confusing and lump stuff on when we don't need it. We also need time to talk about issues and mistakes. Emotions are already tender. Things are already tense. You got to find the right time to do that. Again, sooner is better, provided we're not dealing with client issues or heavy emotions at that time. So this is where you're playing a bit of Jenga. You're playing a bit of, you know, leadership puzzling, if you will, puzzling together the pieces of when is the right time to do this. You know, what is actually important to keep people informed. At first, our team was, you know, we're all researchers and we're all analysts, so we're going to share all this information about COVID. Well, we don't got time for that now because there's so much information about COVID and it's everywhere. And frankly, we've come to the place of realizing that while we're aligned on a lot of things, people may want to personally look at different things, think about different things. So can we make delineations? When we think about Agile, we always think about being very clear when we're making a change in direction. So are we starting and stopping something? Can we really clear? Can we be really, really clear on the timing of those things? Can we make sure that we create those spaces for these conversations to happen, but not on top of client deliverables and not on top of heavy emotions? So work around those things for your other information needs and sharing those. I've had a lot of folks talk to me about tolerances, meaning, well, a couple of good examples that I've heard are things like, I really do want to make space for people talking about COVID and the crisis and what's going on, but we do actually have to get back to work. We do have to get some stuff done. We do have to, you know, keep moving on other fronts. That's one issue. There's also been some challenging situations, and you may be in some of them as well, where staff are feeling afraid, or there are different conversations about safety. You know, we're asking people to do something, they're not sure if it's safe. So some pushback on that. And I think where we're going with tolerance is, again, that careful balance of when is it okay to say, we are doing our absolute best in a difficult situation. And when do you, as the genesis of your business and the heat behind it and the molecule that's going to make it all happen, also need to say to the group, you know, I want to call for something better. I think the ability to find the energy to call for something better from people at this time is going to come from a combination of those things. You setting the right tone, creating the trust system so we're not spending most of our time together wondering who's done what and if things are getting done the way they're supposed to, finding the timing to talk about things when people aren't overwhelmed, and then really creating this sense of tolerance in terms of we want to work out a way together where people's needs to talk about what's going on and process it and have their worries and so on, where that can go on, and we're tolerating it, we're creating a space for it, we're creating some, you know, help around it if we have help. You know, there's lots of good resources out there. I know Innovation Factory has lots of stuff on the website for businesses specifically. There's a lot of free mental health care. So, you know, what kinds of things do we need to address so that we come through this crisis feeling like an effective team, feeling like we haven't left anybody behind, that didn't feel like they needed to be left behind, or that wasn't left behind out of absolute necessity. How can we find the tolerance to do that? If we can create this container to work in during the crisis, we can actually be a lot more effective in getting things done. And again, it's not all about productivity, but let's face it, if we don't have some productivity, we ain't going to be here. So we definitely need to balance out those four things in crisis. So tone, trust, timing, and you're showing some tolerance for how people are expressing themselves while still putting a boundary around it. And the boundary being, what would have to happen for us to keep moving forward even though we're having these feelings? So those are some of the in crisis areas that I wanted to cover off. And as Bridget said at the outset, please do jump in with any questions, any comments, anything that you wanna chat through with me as I'm going. We'll have a little bit of time to chat about experiences at the end too. So now I want to talk about virtual teams. And I have had the pleasure of working with my team online for really deliberately, probably for about the past 8 years. We started out with a little bit more co-location. We still do have a co-location space, but we've been working virtually a lot, and we've been able to learn a few things as we've gone in terms of doing that. So I really wanted to highlight what some of those are. So first of all, it's getting the presence right. So we talked about tone, timing, trust, tolerance. Those are all sort of nice, soft ideas. This one is actually also about being together, working together, but this is actually finding the right cadence or the right amount of presence with the teams that you have, team or teams, and with each individual. What we found with virtual is, as you folks, I'm saying some obvious stuff here, as you folks can appreciate, you don't have the slush fund of all that nice back and forth sort of soft connection that you get when you're live with people. So the more virtual we are, the more deliberate that time becomes. There's not sort of the just sharing space that we have anymore. So there are things that we need to do around that in terms of figuring out how it can work. First of all, you know, who are you guys? Meaning, what do you prefer? What does that look like? what we've done at Pollinate is we pivoted a bunch of times because we all come up with a meeting structure that we're convinced will work, and then it works for a while and then it doesn't work anymore because it's too much, or it's not enough, or it's not quite the right group of us for different things. So reconfiguring is a real thing virtually. You're going to have to probably reconfigure the meetings that you have. And as the leader, you know, how much do people want of you? If people are newer, if people are less experienced, if people are taking on new tasks, if people are feeling somewhat freaked out, they might need a bit more of you. They might need a, you know, a more deliberate time when you can actually get together. Or a different way to spend the time. That's another thing that's actually, as I'm thinking about it, has come up with our team, is to go back to the tolerance thing, finding a bit of time where we can not feel pressured to get right into task mode, but actually talk. And then times when we are immensely in task mode, definitely is a piece. Wellness is key. Wellness is very, very key right now. Boy, oh boy, am I stating the obvious with that one. And I do see we have a question. I'm gonna fold that in. Thank you so much. Fantastic question there.
Christy, I can read it out for those that can
great. Actually, yeah, for sure. Why don't you do that, and then I'll circle back to wellness. So Bridget, if you could read the question, please, that would be great.
We have a question from Maureen. So she says, I'm in diversity and inclusion business. All the more power to you, Maureen, love it. How does current situation impact previous team dynamics where, for example, women, racialized, LGBT, etc., were experiencing workplace difficulties, including with managers? So we'll answer that live.
That is a fantastic question, and I wish we had another hour's webinar to talk about that. Marie, I think you should give us a webinar on that coming up. This is a really interesting question right now. So what happens with groups that were already feeling somewhat marginalized in this situation where there's all kinds of other opportunities to be inclusive or marginalized people? So I think this is one of the things we want to think about when we're in virtual teams, is being very aware, and presence being a start to it, that we are providing equity. And it's interesting, you know, the question is a good one from the perspective of, I think, Maureen, if we think about what was going on before, so what was going on before is sometimes the right voices weren't included. Sometimes, in my own experiences, when a woman leader speaks, you know, men or others speak over her, those sorts of issues have not gone away. I think that there is a huge opportunity and opening right now, though, to have some of those discussions, or to be very overt at saying we need to be very inclusive, and make sure things are accessible for people. And now is a moment when we are resetting all of this, the table's all getting reset. Can we have that conversation more? And Maureen, I'm glad you brought that up, because it's something we should remind ourselves of, is how are we being deliberate to make sure that our goals to be inclusive are happening as we move through this time. But I think that's a majorly important point that we have. And actually, one of the things that's come up for us at Pollinate, which is glancingly related to what you're bringing up, Maureen, around diversity, is, you know, we already have sort of the portfolio of diversity issues that we need to keep working on, in terms of people feeling safe, feeling included, feeling listened to, decolonializing ourselves, figuring out how we become part of the solution and not mired in the problem. And we also have some issues, and they may not be for Innovation Factory clients and happening in Hamilton. For us, we are serving some Indigenous and other populations that are more remote. And sometimes the technology inequities are there. And I know that that's something that's come up with a number of the teachers and educators that we work with, is, you know, everybody's not on an equal ground in our traditional diversity and inclusion categories. And now we have, you know, some folks who are seriously disadvantaged because of their ability to get a hold of tech. So I welcome that comment, and I think it's a really important one, Maureen, is that we really need to be mindful that this is a time to reset. And if there was ever a time where we could do better at bringing an inclusive set of voices to the table, perhaps it's now. Again, technical issues aside, perhaps now we should really be thinking about that. And to that end, a good OD person can always segue. So here I go. We need to create precedent. So Maureen's just brought up a good one we should be thinking about, which is, are we being even more proactive, thinking about our opportunities to wade into the issues that by now we all should be very aware of around diversity and inclusion, although there's lots more to learn always. When we end up in a time like this, we're in a new place. So where I say we can reestablish things, here's what I'm thinking about. If you've studied systems theory at all, and there's a guy named Dave Snowden, highly recommend following him, and I say this with a lot of love. He's kind of a curmudgeonly expert on systems thinking and complexity theory, and we've gone from a simple system at some point back economically, maybe at some point it was more simple. You give me your lump of coal and I'll give you my bar of steel, to a more complicated system, to a complex system. Then, and now we're into chaos because, you know, as I said at the outset, supply chains are not working. Things are really different. Some things are really messed up. Now you might be in that group that is sailing along. Pollinate, thankfully, is in a group where we have gone virtual. So it's testing us, but it's not, it hasn't stopped us yet. But we're moving into this place where what we actually know to be true in systems theory is when you're in a complicated or a complex situation, you can kind of do the plan, do, check, act thing we used to teach all the time. So, you know, think up what to do it, and then check in on it, and then, you know, make some changes. In the realm of chaos, we actually have to act first, see what happens, and then adjust it, as opposed to stepping back, gathering data, thinking it all up. We're actually moving into a time where we have to try small experiments and iterate them. And I know you've heard this before because you're Innovation Factory clients, and you would have gone through some, potentially some design thinking ideas, but this whole idea that entrepreneurs come to really naturally is really true of the world right now, where we have to actually try things to see if they're going to work, and then move forward on them. So this is where I'm thinking about precedent setting. So to Maureen's excellent reminder, can we think about more diversity and inclusion opportunity here for us as business owners? Can we identify new things that are working and create small precedents, even if we lock them in for a while and then we have to iterate them? Can we find those small things that are working and reflect on them together and do more of it? So when I'm thinking about, you know, effectiveness practices, I'm thinking about something like, for example, it may be that for me, when the crisis first started, one of our clients who has, we do commercialization support and mentoring for them. So we work with their clients who sell their product to help them build their businesses, do different things. And we started a new meeting structure because we couldn't get together live. We started a new virtual meeting structure, just an early morning check-in, and I'm finding that's really working. So I'm going to keep going on it. I'm going to try to lock it in and adjust it. But are there things that we're doing that we can keep doing for a while and say, this is a new precedent, this is working for a bit? Forgive ourselves if we need to change it, but start doing something new that's working, and adjust without starting over. Meaning, are there things we were doing that we don't have to totally trash, that we can salvage some of to create our new precedent? Is there any kind of scaffolding we had? The times we met, the ways we connected with our clients, the way we talked about our product. I don't know about you folks, and I saw a few of you anyway, are pivoting, but at Pollinate, we're talking about our products really differently. People have a lot of different concerns 12 weeks ago, believe it or not. The problems they thought they had were really different 12 weeks ago. So as you're thinking about, what are the new problems? What are the new ways we're addressing them? How do we engage this? You are going to have to be thinking about, what are the small, affordable ways that I can set precedent? What are the small things that I can try that say, that's a new way we're going to do it, and stamp it in for a little while? That's an effectiveness practice, because otherwise we're constantly reinventing. Is there a way we can say, okay, I've reinvented enough for now, let's stay with this? It's a little bit about moderating the pace of change by setting some precedents and trying on them. And this is also really dovetails with priorities. The thing that I want to impress upon you about priorities is they are magic. If you can get everybody on the same sense of priorities, and you can get people moving together in a direction, it's purpose giving, it's clarity giving, it's helpful for everybody. And you will also be able to ensure that people are working on what matters most in the business. Right now, people all, and generally speaking, people want to do their best work. Certainly the people you hired have, I'm sure. People I have hired are. But they don't always know what matters most, because we talk about a lot of things. There's a lot going on. They have their own priorities, their own lenses to put on things. So are we all really, really clear what matters most? When we teach Agile at Pollinate, we talk about, have you killed anything that you wanted to stop? Like killed it dead. We've had, situations ourselves. We've gone into client organizations where someone's still working a little bit on that thing because it wasn't 100% clear that, we're just not doing that right now. We're going to park that right now. If you don't kill it dead, zombie projects will eat your brain. Zombie tasks will eat your brain. So give them a proper funeral, get them off the plate if you're not doing them. We not only need to have team priorities, a sprint worth at least right now, we also need to make sure individuals have stuff to do. And this sounds like a bit of a move backwards in leadership theory. We're always trying to empower people, empower. Of course we want to empower people. Of course we want people being able to take initiative. But right here, right now, stuff is happening fast and slow, and time is not material. It's really, really hard for people to keep going completely self-generatively right now. So a little bit more, without falling into micromanagement, a little bit more paying attention to what priorities are getting done could be helpful. It could be really helpful for the team to make sure that people are having slightly more granular to-dos than you would normally give. I guess that's how I would state it. Slightly more granular than what you would normally give. And as things get going, the economy starts reopening. It's going to be another weird time for us. You may need to do more of this, but I would keep an eye on making sure everybody's working on priority systems, and also taking breaks as a priority. Some people might be taking long breaks of necessity because there just isn't the work to do. That's not what I'm talking about. I think we can flail away at stuff when we get busy. And then, as you all know, once you have sort of expended all your energy, it's not as effective. So taking breaks is a priority. And pace, we've talked about how you are, creating the balance for tone and tolerance, and how you can, make sure that you have just the right presence. The other thing to pay attention to in terms of your leadership style is pace. If you're going too fast, people aren't keeping up with you. You'll all of a sudden you'll be like, hey, where is everybody? You'll have all this ideating going on and people won't be tracking along. Make sure people are tracking along. If they are able to forge ahead, and again, it's a weird time. Sometimes people get a big energy rush and want to do stuff. Are they doing the right things? Can you keep pace with them enough to see that that's going on? If people are falling behind, if you're getting some blank stares and so on, what is it they need? Is it a break that's needed? Can they get one? What does that look like? And all of us are in really different situations. I think having just done a little bit of a number of conversations, I wouldn't say it was sort of a needs assessment per se out to the marketplace, but having had bunches of conversations with different folks out there that we've worked with or in our network or so on, we are hearing that one of the most remarkable things about this crisis is we're all having a really common experience in many ways, but the diversity of situations and responses at the individual level is amazing. just how different people are responding. You as the entrepreneur, you as the leader, you got to set the pace. You got to decide, how are we going to keep going here and how fast are we going to go? When this first happened, I wrote about it being similar to being caught in a riptide. And, you know, when you're caught in a riptide, the folklore or the original thinking was to swim in a parallel line with the shore. So you can see the shore and you'll probably swim out of the rip. Some experts still say that. Some say to float and just see if there's an opportunity when you see breaking waves to swim out. Right now, what we want to make sure of is that we don't exhaust ourselves before our opportunity comes. So as I said, spirit animal, cat. When do we want to pounce? So yes, keep a good pace. Yes, you've got to be ready, because when your opportunity pops up, when you see that thing that you're pivoting toward, or you get some kind of positive signal from the market, you need to be ready to go. So you need to have things in place, but you also can't be exhausted. So that's another real balance to keep in the back of your mind. And I don't have, unfortunately, ratios and equations to give you on how exactly to do this, but it is a super, super important thing to pay attention to. And as the leader, you will set the pace. People will do their own things. Even we find with the younger generation who can work, you know, have a certain way to think about working. You are going to set the pace. So pay attention to the pace that you want to set, for sure. I also had lead indicators. I wanted to chat with you all about these lead indicators just quickly. These are ways that I really pay attention to. This is my back of the napkin scorecard at all times, not just in crisis and not just virtual, about whether I think things are actually effective or not. And so first of all, do you have anything to celebrate? If you don't have anything to celebrate, or you got to make stuff up to celebrate that isn't very meaningful, not being effective. You need meaning in the work. Meaning, meaning, meaning. It's got to be meaningful, even if it's tiny. That's okay. But we need to find meaning in the work. We know this about humans, that it is very difficult for us, and it's way too hard being in an entrepreneurial venture to just put the days in and grind it through. This is way too hard. You can't do this now in an entrepreneurial venture. You got to really have some meaning. So we're looking for some celebrations that are meaningful. If people don't feel appreciated, eventually they will leave, or they will become dysfunctional in some way. I wish there was a pill I could give you that would solve this problem. I would have cornered the market on such a thing for sure, but this is the reality. People need to feel appreciated, and you need to know that they do. So in whatever way is comfortable for you, start paying attention. Are people celebrating? Are they feeling appreciated? If they are, then you have something effective going, especially if you can sustain it over time. I talked a little bit before about capacity and the whole idea of setting priorities to make sure that people are not over or under capacity. You want to be using all the capacities that's there without borrowing so much from the future that you folks are exhausted when it's time to make a jump in a direction. So whatever trust system you're using, whatever writing down of things that you're using, make sure you always know who has capacity, who's over capacity, and we need to leave them alone for a bit or help them out. And how do you know? Meaning ongoingly. This is an art form. Again, we don't want to micromanage people, but we do want to know where the capacity is that we can jump on when we need it. So important to think about that. Maybe bake that into some of your thinking about your trust system. This goes with celebration a little bit, but we may not celebrate every single thing that gets done. But remember how I said in the trust system, we got to figure out somewhere to write stuff down so we know what's getting done. We can be accountable. Completion is a real indicator of effectiveness. Completion is a real indicator of effectiveness. This is why we don't want to approach our work like it is a conveyor belt, like it is a manufacturing situation, unless you are in manufacturing, but we don't want to approach our leadership work like it's being done sort of over time, a piece at a time per se. We want to drip fed all our leadership into the people, but we want to actually see tasks being completed. So in whatever way that comes to fruition for you, whether it's on checklists or use Trello, or you just know because things have gone out the door, if you're not seeing things coming to fruition, which is why we do love Kanbaning at Pollinate, we love to see that, then it's something you need to pay attention to for sure. And are you getting done what you intended to do? That's an important one for me. Am I actually getting my stuff done? Pretty important to pay attention to that. You always have to be rigorous with yourself about whether you really are on the right priorities. Not a time for side projects, people, unless it's one you're going to pivot into. That's an important one. And finally, and we will stay on for a couple of minutes of questions, coordination. Are people working together well? So it might just be you might be the mainpreneur, but whoever you're working with, is it going well? Are you able to get them? Is the flow feeling good? Are people feeling like things are moving forward? At a time like this, staying effective really means keeping that narrative moving along and being able to celebrate things with people, but also showing them we're getting things done. And look at that. You guys are coordinating. We are coordinating. Pointing out the fact that we can do it. We are doing it and it feels good is super important. I would like to stop there. And in closing, just, really encourage you to figure out what matters most on this list. And is there one of these things that you could do that would up your game? And I'm going to throw it back over to Bridget because I know we're right near to the hour.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Christy, for this presentation. I certainly got a lot out of it, actually. So I took a lot of notes myself as you were going through. So we do have a couple of minutes, maybe just one more minute for some last Q&A. If you don't have any questions, please feel free to connect with us if you would like to connect with Pollinate. We are happy to make connections if you are interested. So at any time you can connect with me at bridget.heward@innovationfactory.ca or just connect with Innovation Factory directly and we will connect you as needed. So thank you again to Christy and to Amy and Stacy who helped facilitate for a wonderful presentation. I hope you got a lot of value out of the session and we'd like to thank you for joining us today. So if there's no Q&A, I will close it out for the afternoon. And thank you again, Christy.
No, it was great. It was really great. I appreciate the opportunity. I do want to say to all the entrepreneurs, I think that the roundtables, the opportunity to talk to your mentors at Innovation Factory are key. Every time we're mid-pivot, I wouldn't jinx myself by saying it's going well. I'm touching wood as I'm saying we're cautiously optimistic. But our back and forth with our mentors has been key. Like it's changed our language, it's changed some of our thinking, it's really refined. So you may not be as much a verbal processor as I am, everybody on the phone, but it's a huge resource right now.
Yes, absolutely. We're here to help.
Yeah.
So yes, please connect. Making connections at this time, I think everybody needs it, wants it, and people are here to help and are willing and able. So by all means, please do.
Great.
Okay, so thank you so much to Pollinate for joining Innovation Factory today. And we will see you at future sessions, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great, wonderful afternoon.